Megan never planned to ruin her husband's career, but the moment she saw Daniel's hand lingering on Emily's back under the golden lights of the company holiday party, she knew the night would not end quietly. The hotel ballroom shimmered under warm golden light, crystal chandeliers reflecting across polished floors like frozen stars. The scent of pine and cinnamon drifted from tall decorative trees placed in every corner, their branches heavy with ornaments. Waiters moved silently between tables, balancing trays of champagne and small plates of hors d'oeuvres. Outside, the winter wind pressed against the windows, but inside, the air was thick with the sound of music, clinking glasses, and the quiet hum of expensive conversation. Julia stepped inside, her heels clicking softly, every step deliberate. She wore a deep red dress that drew glances, but not for the reasons anyone imagined. In her small clutch was a flash drive, no bigger than a coin, yet heavier than any object she had ever carried. It contained weeks of work, each file a piece of evidence, each photograph a nail in the coffin of her marriage. She had not come to this holiday party to celebrate. She had come to end something in a way no one would forget. The idea had taken shape in her mind like a shadow that refused to leave. She had never attended one of Mark's company parties before. In the past, she stayed home, avoiding the shallow small talk of corporate gatherings. But this year was different. This year she had a reason to be there. Mark's betrayal was not a vague suspicion or a passing worry, it was carved into her memory in the form of images she could never unsee. She had watched silently as the man she had built a life with moved closer and closer to someone else, crossing lines that could not be uncrossed. She could have confronted him privately, could have asked him to explain, but she knew there would be lies. There were always lies. Instead, she decided on a different kind of confrontation, one that would leave no room for denial. The ballroom buzzed with energy as employees arrived in pairs and groups, shaking off the cold and stepping into the warmth. Laughter drifted from one corner, music swelled from the speakers, and in the center of it all, Mark stood with a drink in his hand, talking to Lily. They stood close, too close for two people who claimed to be just colleagues. Their bodies leaned toward each other in a way that made the rest of the room fade for them, though they pretended otherwise. Julia watched them from across the room, her gaze steady, her heartbeat quickening. She could see it already, the way Lily's eyes lingered, the small smile that appeared whenever Mark spoke. It was the same smile Julia had once thought belonged to her alone. Now, it felt like an unwanted echo. Julia moved further into the room, her steps smooth, her expression composed. She greeted a few people she recognized from past company dinners, though her mind was not on the conversations. She was calculating, timing her movements, keeping Mark in her peripheral vision. He hadn't seen her yet. That was good. She wanted the first time he noticed her tonight to be memorable. The music shifted to something slower, softer, and the lights dimmed just enough to give the room a golden haze. Somewhere in the corner, the DJ sat behind his booth, adjusting equipment, preparing for the evening's announcements. Julia glanced at him briefly, the unspoken understanding between them a quiet thread pulling the night toward its climax. Her plan had required precision. She had approached the DJ earlier in the week with a carefully rehearsed request, presenting it as part of the company's special holiday program. He had agreed without asking too many questions. People rarely refused a well-dressed woman with a confident smile. Now, all that was left was to wait for the right moment. She positioned herself at a table with a clear view of the screen mounted above the stage. Her fingers brushed the edge of the clutch, feeling the outline of the flash drive inside. Every time she touched it, she felt both a surge of adrenaline and a deep, cold calm. It was strange how betrayal could make someone both furious and icy all at once. Across the room, Mark's hand brushed Lily's arm, and she leaned into him slightly, the gesture small but intimate. Julia felt a sharp twist in her chest, but it didn't break her focus. If anything, it steadied her resolve. Around them, people mingled, exchanged holiday greetings, and laughed over shared memories from the year. None of them knew that the night would soon take a turn they would never forget. Julia's eyes flicked toward the clock above the bar. She had decided that the reveal would happen at the peak of the evening, when the room was full and no one could slip away unnoticed. There would be no quiet escape for Mark and Lily. The waiters circulated again, refilling glasses, offering bite-sized appetizers. Julia declined each one, her stomach too tight to take in anything. She sipped water instead, watching the crowd, memorizing their faces. She wondered how many of these people already suspected something, How many had caught glimpses of stolen glances or overheard fragments of conversation? Office walls had a way of holding secrets, but holiday parties loosened lips. By the end of tonight, no one would need to speculate. Mark finally spotted her. His eyes widened slightly before he masked it with a polite smile, but she had already seen the flash of unease. He excused himself from Lily, but Julia noticed the way his hand lingered for a second too long on her back before he stepped away. He approached slowly, as though unsure whether to greet her warmly or cautiously. Julia returned his smile, a mirror image of his own, but said nothing. Her silence unsettled him. She could tell. Good. The less he knew about what was coming, the better. The DJ's voice broke through the music, calling for everyone to gather near the stage for the evening's special presentation. Julia's pulse quickened, though her face remained calm. Mark glanced toward the stage, his attention momentarily shifting away from her. Julia stood, clutch in hand, and began walking toward the DJ booth. She could feel eyes following her, though no one yet understood why. The room quieted as people turned toward the screen. The first images were harmless photos from company picnics, award ceremonies, and team outings. Laughter rippled through the crowd as familiar moments appeared. Then, without warning, the images changed. Julia's heart hammered as the first photograph appeared: Mark and Lily in a hotel lobby, standing close, their expressions soft and familiar. A murmur moved through the room. Another image followed, messages exchanged late at night, the words unmistakably intimate. Then came screenshots of location pings, placing them in the same places at the same times, far from the office. Gasps replaced laughter. Heads turned toward Mark and Lily. Julia didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the screen, each image a public confession he had no control over. The ballroom no longer felt warm. It felt charged, heavy with the shock of discovery. Julia had imagined this moment for weeks, but even she hadn't anticipated the silence that followed the last image. It was as if the entire room had stopped breathing, and in that stillness, Julia felt something strange: relief. The silence that followed the final image felt almost unreal, as if the party had been frozen in time. Then the whispers began, moving through the crowd in sharp bursts like sparks catching dry leaves. Julia stood at her table, the clutch still in her hand, feeling the weight of every stare in the room. Mark had not moved since the images began, his drink held in one hand like he had forgotten what it was for. Lily stood a short distance away, her expression tight, her gaze fixed on the floor. Julia let the moment breathe, knowing the shock would only deepen the longer the quiet lasted. She didn't need to speak. The proof had done all the speaking for her. As she scanned the room, she saw the faces of people who had worked alongside Mark for years. Some looked confused, others angry, and a few seemed almost satisfied, as if something they had long suspected had finally been confirmed. Office rumors had always carried faint traces of this story, but tonight, those traces had hardened into undeniable truth. The holiday party's festive energy had drained away completely, replaced by a cold, unblinking attention that followed Mark wherever he moved. Julia had anticipated every possible reaction. She had imagined him denying it, laughing it off, trying to charm his way through. But instead, he seemed hollow, as though the air had been punched out of him. His eyes found hers across the room, and for a moment, there was no sound but the slow thud of her heartbeat. She thought about all the months she had spent piecing this together, moving quietly through his life like an unseen shadow. He had thought her silence meant ignorance. He had mistaken observation for oblivion. A month earlier, the first seed of suspicion had been planted in her mind. It had been small, almost invisible at first: a faint perfume on his jacket that was not hers, the way he avoided eye contact when asked about his schedule. She might have dismissed it if not for the message she had seen by accident on his smartwatch, the glowing preview on the screen reading Lily's name in a short, suggestive sentence that couldn't be explained away. That single glimpse had cracked open a door in her mind, and once open, she had been unable to close it. From that moment on, she had become meticulous. She learned his patterns, the times he claimed to be in meetings, the moments when his phone mysteriously went silent. She began collecting fragments, screenshots of text messages he left open on his laptop, photos of him leaving the office with Lily when no one else was around, copies of hotel bookings charged to their joint account. She didn't confront him, not once. Instead, she gathered each piece like a careful archivist, building a story so complete it would collapse on him with the force of undeniable truth. Her decision to reveal it at the holiday party had come weeks later, after overhearing Mark on the phone late one night. His tone was low, his words muffled, but the intimacy was unmistakable. In that moment, Julia realized that a private confrontation would give him room to twist the truth, to manipulate the narrative, to make her doubt herself. She didn't want doubt anymore, she wanted finality. She wanted the truth to be so public that there would be no way to hide from it. The holiday party, with its full guest list and cameras ready to record, was perfect. Arranging the presentation had required both subtlety and nerve. She had approached the DJ under the guise of wanting to surprise her husband with a fun tribute for his years at the company. She smiled, spoke confidently, and handed over a flash drive, telling him exactly when to play it. He hadn't questioned her, why would he? The files were labeled innocently, with names like company memories and holiday highlights, only she knew what the second half contained. Now, standing in the center of the ballroom's tension, she could feel the plan locking into place around her. The evidence had been seen by everyone who mattered, from the lowest-ranking intern to the CEO at the head table. Phones were already out, recording the aftermath, snapping photos of Mark's expression, Lily's shame, and Julia's calm stance in the middle of it all. This was not a story that could be contained within the walls of the hotel. By morning, it would be whispered through every department, replayed in every break room, forwarded through private group chats. Mark finally moved, setting his untouched drink down on a table. He glanced toward the exit, perhaps weighing the humiliation of staying against the humiliation of leaving. Lily had already edged toward the side door, avoiding the direct path that would take her past Julia. The DJ, sensing the tension, tried to play music again, but the sound felt hollow against the heavy air. People talked in hushed tones, their attention still flicking back to Mark. Julia remained where she was, letting him make the next move. The beauty of her plan was that she didn't need to say a single word. Every explanation he might offer would sound like an excuse in the face of the images burned into everyone's mind. Her silence was stronger than any accusation. She had spent weeks preparing for this, and now the weight of her preparation was pressing down on him harder than any verbal attack could. The hotel staff began moving through the room, unsure whether the event was still unfolding or if it had collapsed entirely. A few guests slipped away quietly, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire of a scandal. Julia could see the company's HR director in the corner, speaking in a low voice to another executive, both of them glancing occasionally toward Mark and Lily. This wasn't just personal humiliation, it was professional damage. Julia allowed herself a small, controlled breath, not of satisfaction but of closure. The moment she had imagined for so long was no longer just a vision in her mind. It was happening in real time, exactly as she had planned. She didn't feel joy exactly, but there was a strange lightness in knowing that the truth was no longer something she carried alone. It was out in the open, belonging to everyone in that room. Mark's shoulders sagged slightly, a subtle sign that the fight had gone out of him. Julia knew then that he wouldn't try to deny it, at least not tonight. He would retreat, regroup, and perhaps try to spin the story later, but the damage was already done. The truth had been seen, and no matter what he said afterward, it would always be there, recorded in dozens of phones, replayed in dozens of minds. As he finally turned and walked toward the exit, the crowd seemed to part for him, their silence more cutting than any words could be. Lily was already gone, having slipped out earlier. Julia watched him leave without moving, her expression unreadable. The music resumed faintly in the background, but the party was over in all but name. What remained now was the long aftermath, the slow unraveling of a marriage, and the ripple effect of a single public moment that could never be taken back. And as the ballroom began to empty, Julia felt the quiet certainty that this was only the beginning of what would come next. The night outside was cold and still, but inside the hotel, the air remained thick with the echo of what had just unfolded. Julia stayed seated at her table, her hands resting lightly on the clutch as if it were no more than a casual accessory, though it had been the very tool that shattered the evening. Around her, the remnants of the holiday party drifted into something unrecognizable. The cheerful laughter, the light-hearted conversations, and the harmless gossip had vanished, replaced by careful voices and sidelong glances. The soft glow of the chandeliers now seemed too bright, as if exposing every hidden corner of the room. Julia's eyes followed the DJ as he packed away the flash drive she had given him, placing it carefully into his pocket before avoiding her gaze. He had done his part, though she knew he likely didn't want to be drawn into the fallout. Mark had disappeared the moment the crowd closed in with their stares. He hadn't said a word to Julia before leaving, and she hadn't needed him to. His silence was its own confession. The door had shut behind him quietly, yet it felt like the sound had reverberated through every inch of the ballroom. Lily had gone even earlier, escaping through a side exit before most people could approach her. Julia pictured them outside, perhaps speaking in hurried tones or perhaps already turning away from each other. Whether they would remain entangled after this public unraveling was not Julia's concern. Her goal had never been to break them apart privately, it had been to show everyone exactly what they had done. The party continued in a strange, half-hearted way. A few people made an effort to return to their drinks, to talk about other things, but it was impossible. The images from the presentation had burned themselves into the night. Every conversation eventually circled back to it. The hotel staff moved from table to table, clearing plates and glasses, but even they paused to exchange brief looks, knowing they had witnessed something far from ordinary. Julia noticed the company's CEO leaving early, his expression tight, walking with quick strides toward the elevator. He had been seated at the front, with the best view of the screen. He had seen every detail. She wondered what would happen in the office on Monday morning when the real consequences began to take shape. Julia finished her water and rose from her seat, moving through the crowd with the same controlled pace she had used when she entered. People stepped aside, some offering sympathetic glances, others curious, as though they wanted to ask her questions but didn't dare. She could feel the weight of their attention following her, but she kept her focus forward. She stopped near the entrance of the ballroom and looked back briefly, committing the scene to memory: the gold decorations, the tables now half empty, the faint murmur of unsettled guests. This was the place where the truth had been laid bare. She didn't leave right away. Instead, she moved toward the quieter side of the room, where a small bar stood in the corner. A lone waiter was polishing glasses, his eyes occasionally darting toward the rest of the party. Julia ordered nothing, simply standing there and letting the noise fade into the background. She needed a moment to absorb the reality that the months of preparation were over. The secret she had carried was no longer hers to protect or hide. It was public now, alive in the minds of everyone present. She had expected to feel triumph, but instead she felt a steady calm, almost a kind of emptiness, like the air after a storm. In her mind, she replayed the moments leading up to tonight. The late nights when she had scrolled through his phone records, the mornings when she had followed his car at a distance just to see where he really went, the hours spent cropping and organizing screenshots so that each one told its part of the story. She thought of the small camera she had hidden in her own car to capture the nights he used it to meet Lily. Each image, each timestamp, had been a cut, a small wound she had carried until they formed a single, unignorable truth. She had been careful not to let her emotions lead her to rash action. She had saved everything for one single, unbreakable blow. A few guests began leaving in clusters, their voices lowering as they passed by Julia. She knew that by the time they reached the cold air outside, they would already be retelling the story to others who hadn't been there. That was part of her strategy. She hadn't just exposed the affair to a room of people. She had set it on a path to spread beyond these walls. By the next day, it would be impossible for Mark to step into a meeting or walk down a hallway without feeling the shift in how people looked at him. The evidence wasn't only visual, it was in the way reputations altered in an instant. She turned slightly and saw the HR director speaking quietly with one of the senior managers, both of them glancing toward her before looking away. That didn't surprise her. An affair between two employees was bad enough. An affair between a manager and a subordinate carried legal and ethical risks for the company. It could become a serious problem for them, the kind of problem that required official action. Julia knew this was no longer just her personal revenge, it was the start of something much larger for the people involved. When she finally decided to leave the ballroom, the hallway outside felt almost eerily quiet. The carpeted floor muted her footsteps as she made her way toward the elevators. She passed a few stragglers lingering near the lobby, some of whom turned to watch her go. She didn't slow down. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and she stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. As the doors closed, she caught her own reflection in the polished steel, a composed woman in a red dress, no longer carrying the weight of suspicion or secrecy. The lobby was nearly empty when she emerged. Outside, the cold air rushed at her, sharp against her skin. She breathed it in deeply, letting it fill her lungs, as though she needed to replace the thick, stifling air of the ballroom with something clean. Snowflakes drifted down slowly, settling on her hair and shoulders before melting away. She walked to her car without looking back at the hotel. There was no need to. Everything she had come here to do was already done. When she sat in the driver's seat, she didn't start the engine immediately. She rested her hands on the steering wheel and stared out at the quiet street. Somewhere in the city, Mark was dealing with the immediate aftermath, whether with Lily or alone. She didn't care. She had no interest in what his next move would be. Her mind was already shifting toward her own next steps. There would be decisions to make about her marriage, her finances, her future, but none of them felt overwhelming now. The hardest part had been carrying the truth in silence. That silence was gone. Before pulling away, she reached into her clutch and removed the flash drive, holding it between her fingers. It was just a small piece of plastic and metal, but it had changed everything. She placed it in the glove compartment, shutting it with a quiet click. The snow continued to fall as she finally started the car, the headlights cutting through the gentle white curtain. As she drove away from the hotel, the ballroom and all its golden light disappeared behind her, swallowed by the night. What remained was a strange, steady certainty. This was far from over, but it was already too far gone for anyone to undo. The morning after the holiday party began quietly for Julia, but it was not the kind of quiet that comes with peace. It was the stillness before a storm, a pause in which the world seemed to hold its breath. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands, staring at the phone on the counter. It hadn't stopped buzzing since she woke. Messages from friends, acquaintances, even people she barely knew were arriving one after another, each carrying the same thread of disbelief and curiosity. Some expressed support, others asked questions she had no intention of answering. She didn't need to reply to any of them. The truth was already moving through the city like smoke, finding every corner it could slip into. In the hours since she had left the hotel, the videos from the party had spread online. Several guests had recorded the moment the presentation changed from innocent company photos to the damning evidence. Those clips now lived on multiple social media accounts, drawing comments from people far beyond the walls of the ballroom. Julia scrolled briefly through one before setting her phone down. She didn't want to read what strangers had to say about her life, but she understood the power of what was happening. Once something escaped into the digital world, it could not be contained. Across town, Mark was feeling the full weight of that truth. She could picture it without needing to be there. The unreadable number of missed calls, the emails marked urgent, the notifications piling up faster than he could clear them. He had always been careful about maintaining an image of professionalism and control. Now, that image had been split apart in front of the very people whose respect he had worked for years to earn. It wasn't only his personal life in ruins, it was his career. By mid-morning, Julia received word from a mutual acquaintance that the company's executives had called an emergency meeting. It wasn't hard to guess what it was about. An affair between two employees was one thing. An affair between a manager and a subordinate, made public in such a dramatic way, was a liability. The leadership couldn't ignore it. HR policies, legal exposure, the potential for formal complaints, all of it now sat squarely on their shoulders. Julia knew they would act quickly. Not out of moral outrage, but out of the need to protect the company. She spent most of the day in her living room, alternating between pacing the floor and sitting still, lost in thought. The events of the night before replayed in her mind in fragments. The way the screen glowed in the dim light, the sharp gasp from somewhere in the back of the room, the frozen look on Mark's face. She wondered if he had known, in that instant, that his life had just changed in a way he could never undo. She thought about Lily too, how she had slipped away quietly, perhaps believing she could escape the worst of the attention. But if Julia had learned anything, it was that secrets rarely stayed buried once they surfaced. Lily's name was now tied to the scandal, whether she liked it or not. Late in the afternoon, a message from a friend confirmed what Julia had already suspected. Lily had resigned from her position effective immediately. The resignation had been sent by email, addressed to the CEO and copied to our. There had been no farewell gathering, no chance to explain her side, just a short, formal note ending her employment. Julia read the forwarded email twice, noting the precise and impersonal tone. Lily's exit might have been quiet, but it was no less final. Mark's situation, however, was not as simple. By early evening, news reached Julia that he had been placed on administrative leave pending a formal investigation. The company was reviewing the evidence, yes, including the material from her presentation, and considering whether his actions violated internal policies. The words code of conduct and misuse of authority appeared more than once in the message her contact sent. Julia imagined him sitting in his home office, staring at a growing list of consequences, each one heavier than the last. She wondered if he regretted the affair, or if he only regretted being caught in such a public and irreversible way. That night, Julia finally allowed herself to open the folder on her laptop where she had stored every piece of evidence. She went through it slowly, one image at a time, remembering the nights she had sat in the dark, piecing it all together. The hotel lobby photo, the string of messages, the location data, each had been a weight on her mind when she first collected it. Now, they were simply files, their purpose fulfilled. She considered deleting them, but instead she backed them up to another drive. Some part of her wanted to keep them not as a weapon, but as a record, a reminder of what she had survived. The following day brought a new wave of developments. Julia woke to find that one of the largest gossip blogs in the city had picked up the story. Though it didn't name her directly, it described the scene at the party in detail. The article quoted anonymous witnesses who painted a vivid picture of the moment the screen changed, the way the room fell silent, the expressions on Mark and Lily's faces. Julia didn't know if the witnesses were embellishing the truth, but she didn't care. The damage had already spread far beyond the company. As the days passed, the scandal began to shift from fresh outrage to a lingering shadow over everyone involved. Julia received fewer messages from acquaintances, though the ones she did get carried a sharper edge, people wanting to know if she planned to divorce him, if she would give interviews, if she had more to reveal. She ignored them all. The real decisions she needed to make were private, and she intended to keep them that way until she was ready. Mark's leave from the company stretched on without resolution, and the rumors only grew in the absence of official statements. Julia heard from someone in HR that the investigation had uncovered other irregularities, expenses that didn't add up, unexplained trips, meetings that had nothing to do with work. It seemed the affair was just one thread in a much larger pattern. That revelation didn't shock her. She had already learned that betrayal rarely exists in isolation. It spreads, touching parts of a person's life you wouldn't expect, eroding trust in ways that can't be repaired. One evening, nearly a week after the party, Julia sat in her living room with the lights low, thinking about what would come next. She had already made an appointment with a lawyer, knowing she wanted a clean break. There was no anger left in her now, only clarity. She had given him years of her life, and in return he had given her a truth she could never unlearn. Her decision was not born of rage but of certainty. She could no longer be tied to someone whose life was built on secrets. Outside, the winter wind pressed against the windows, the same way it had on the night of the party. But this time, Julia didn't feel the chill. She felt grounded, steady, as though the cold could not reach her. Somewhere out there, Mark was dealing with the slow collapse of his career, Lily was beginning her life under the weight of public shame, and the company was still working to contain the mess. But Julia's part in the story was finished. She had set the truth free, and now it was out in the world, beyond her control. And in that, she found the strange, quiet satisfaction of knowing she would never again have to carry it alone. The hotel lobby was eerily quiet when the police escorted Mark out in handcuffs, the bright lights from camera phones flashing as guests and employees whispered in shock. Hours earlier, the holiday party had been a scene of laughter and luxury, but now it was the center of a criminal investigation. Sarah stood near the entrance, her face pale but her posture strong, refusing to look away from the man she had once loved. She had already given her statement, every detail laid bare, from the suspicious glances to the evidence she had gathered. The detectives carried sealed evidence bags, one of them containing a blood-stained scarf pulled from the storage room where the body had been found. The victim, Emily, had been discovered slumped in a chair, a glass of wine spilled on the carpet beside her. The forensic team moved in silence, photographing every angle, while the hotel security replayed surveillance footage that would soon become key to the case. Hours passed, and the celebration hall stood abandoned, confetti on the floor, a stark reminder of how quickly joy had turned to horror. Sarah sat in a private room with a female officer, her mind replaying the moment she had followed Emily to the back hallway during the party. She had not expected violence. She had expected a confrontation, maybe a heated argument. Instead, she had walked in on chaos. Emily's voice had been sharp, and Mark's body language aggressive. Then there was a sound, something heavy hitting the floor, and everything changed. The officer wrote rapidly, nodding as Sarah described the final moments before she screamed for help. Meanwhile, Mark's version of the night painted him as the victim of circumstance. He claimed he and Emily had been arguing about work, that Sarah had misinterpreted their relationship, and that Emily's sudden collapse was an accident. But the evidence told a different story. The scarf matched the fibers found under Emily's nails, and the autopsy report would later reveal strangulation. Still, Mark's lawyer was quick to argue that nothing had been proven, insisting the case was built on assumptions. The court battle loomed ahead, promising to expose every hidden corner of their lives. As the investigation deepened, detectives discovered months of secret communication between Mark and Emily. Email threads laced with affection, hotel bookings in different cities, and unexplained expenses on Mark's corporate card all pointed toward a prolonged affair. The company's HR department became involved, launching their own review that unearthed complaints from other employees about Mark's behavior at corporate events. The image of a respected manager began to crumble, replaced by that of a man driven by ego and control. Sarah, who had once defended him to friends and family, felt her trust dissolve completely. She no longer saw a man who made mistakes. She saw someone who had deliberately deceived her. The trial date was set for early spring, but the media frenzy began immediately. News outlets ran headlines that painted Mark as a ruthless adulterer and possible killer, while others speculated about Sarah's role in uncovering the truth. She received messages from strangers praising her bravery, but also ones from people accusing her of ruining a man's life without proof. The weight of public scrutiny was heavy, but Sarah knew she could not back down. Every time she considered withdrawing from the case, she remembered Emily's lifeless form in that cold storage room. When the trial finally began, the prosecution focused on motive and opportunity. They painted a picture of Mark feeling trapped between his marriage and his affair, worried that Emily might expose their relationship to the company and his wife. Sarah's testimony was powerful but emotionally draining. She spoke with precision, avoiding speculation and sticking to what she had witnessed. The defense attempted to discredit her, suggesting she was jealous, vindictive, and determined to destroy Mark's career out of spite. Yet, each time they tried to twist her words, the jury seemed to grow more skeptical of their strategy. In the end, it was the surveillance footage that sealed Mark's fate. The grainy video showed him following Emily into the hallway just minutes before her death, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. Although the actual moment of violence was obscured, the timing matched perfectly with Sarah's account and the forensic evidence. The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning with a guilty verdict for second-degree murder. Mark's expression was unreadable as the sentence was read, but Sarah felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but it came at the cost of so many broken lives. Months later, Sarah visited Emily's family. She had written them letters during the trial, but meeting them in person was different. They thanked her for speaking up, for not letting the case fade into silence, even though it meant reliving the trauma over and over. As she left their home, she realized the past could never truly be erased, but the truth had been brought into the open. The holiday party that began with champagne, toasts and laughter had ended in tragedy, but it had also exposed a hidden darkness. Sarah walked away, knowing she had faced that darkness and refused to let it win.